talk this afternoon is about a project that a group of NAS members undertook earlier this year, looking at some archival research for a project that we were asked to do on behalf of the Cherish organisation. So I'd like to thank Cherish for allowing us to use this data today. So a little bit of background about the project before we go into it in any detail. It dates back to the autumn of 2019, back in those halcyon days when we could actually visit places. And the overall project was being run by both Cherish and the NAS, looking at arranging a public engagement event that was in September 2020 at Abersoch in North Wales. As part of this project, they were going to use as a point of reference 2 hulks of vessels that were in the intertidal zone, believed, according to the Coughlin website, which people who were on the WWW talk before heard a lot about from Ian Cundy. These 2 wrecks were believed to be the Maria and the Fossil. The plan was for us to delve into the archives and tell the story of these 2 vessels and how they came to be on Abersoch Beach. We were going to get as much information as we could from some secondary sources and then take that information into the archives, such as at Kew and York and the Maritime Museum at Liverpool. So for those of you who are not quite so familiar with the geography of Wales and where Abersoch is one of many small coastal towns that sit around the coast of Wales. Wales itself has a long history of coastal trading, and many of these small towns acted as ports, especially in the 19th century prior to the arrival of the railways. Abersoch itself sits on the southern edge of the Clyn Peninsula, which is the northern arm of Wales, and it is a place that's had a lot of historic wrecks and maritime history around it. So from the hand-drawn map there, you can see Abersoch on the map, and the red arrow points to the location where these 2 vessels are situated, partway between Abersoch itself and the next small town along to the east, Llanbedrog. You can also see on the map St Patrick's Causeway or St Patrick's Reef, as was discussed this morning, and St Tudwall's Islands, and all the other little coastal towns that are situated around there, including one aptly named Hellsmouth Bay. So none of the team of researchers had actually been to Abersoch, so we were completely unfamiliar with the sites ourselves. The information that we were given about the vessels came from the team who went over in autumn 2019. And they supplied us with pictures here. So you can see in the screen the pictures of both vessels, which don't show a lot of information about particular characteristics of these 2 hulks. But what we did know was based on these photos and some of the drawings that were sent over, which included an approximate length of the vessels. So we knew that these vessels were both ruggedly constructed wood, and were working vessels rather than pleasure craft. The larger of the 2 vessels, believed to be the Fossil, was approximately 18.5 meters in length, and the Maria, smaller, at 12 meters in length. What isn't apparent on any of the photos that you can see here is that next to the hulk of the Maria, there is a part of a steam winch which may or may not be related to the vessel itself. There's no evidence to support that in either way at this time. So the plan was now for us to get some information about these 2 sites from secondary sources and then take it to the archives at Kew and Liverpool, etc., and build their history back up from there. So we started with our Google search, which is where a lot of searches start these days, and we typed in the fossil and the Maria. And I'll point out at this point, the spelling for fossil is not a typo on my behalf. That is how it is entered into the historic record at this time. We came up with 2 sites from this search. The first of these was a match for both vessels, and it listed them both for the Maria at 1872 and the fossil for 1889. Now, a little bit more digging on this website revealed that the source of this data was the recountings of a lady back in early 1950s who was recounting the tales that she had been told. And amongst these 2 vessels, there was also a list of other vessels that had come ashore at Abersoch as well. The second website was related to one of the local maritime museums. And on this occasion, it only showed us a wrecking date for the fossil. This time, the more conventionally spelt double S. It also provided us with a different date of wrecking as well, as it gave us 1902, and a slightly different location. There was no mention at all of the Maria in this instance. So we went back to the more traditional secondary sources and picked up our volume of the Shipwreck Index of the British Isles by Richard and Bridget Larne, and worked through this North Wales section of this book. This book did give us the Maria, but this time in the 18th century, and no mention at all of the fossil. Again, it also gave us a list of different vessels that had not been previously identified. We were beginning to get a little bit confused at this point. So we moved on to a 4th book, or 4th source, which was the Shipwrecks of North Wales by Ivor Wynne-Jones, which again is another source that was mentioned by Ian Cundy on the Welsh Web Research Project earlier today. And coming at the same picture that he shows a list of vessels being wrecked at Abersoch coming out there with 24 vessels in it. Including in that is the Maria and the fossil. However, this list does not give a wrecking date or type of vessel, and is the only source of reference to these 2 wrecks, or 2 vessels, in this book. So essentially, we now have 4 completely different lists of vessels wrecked at Abersoch, and wrecks at Abersoch, and not much information about the Maria and the fossil themselves, which left us a little bit of problem. How are we actually going to do this then? So we decided to go back to primary source data and draw up our own list. And we did this by conducting a simple search of Abersoch and the shore from the 1840s onwards, using the British Newspaper Archive, which is a online repository of newspapers over a long period of time. It is subscription based. And we also used the National Library of Wales's newspaper archive, which is free to use, however, only focuses on Welsh newspapers and Welsh speaking newspapers. From these 2 sources, we came up with a list of 26 possible vessels. Included in this list was the Maria twice for 1872, but no mention of the fossil, although we felt it was important to keep this vessel included so that we could understand how the Abersoch beach vessels had come to be associated with this name. Subsequently, as we were going through the research, we also identified a further 5 vessels that were added to the project, which gave us 31 vessels in total that needed investigation. Our project, we felt at this point, had just become much larger, and we were going to need to get into the archives as soon as possible. Then we hit a small problem. This was at the end of March, beginning of April this year. And just as our project was about to start, the archives became obtainable to us. We still had to deliver this project because we had agreed to have it available for the public engagement event in September, and we still didn't know at this time whether this event would go ahead or not. So we had to come up with a strategy to get as much of this work done as possible so that we would be able to finish it off when the archives became available to us again. We did this by accessing data that we knew from experience was available online. The first of these that we did access was a registry. Oh, sorry, but before I do this, go further, we are going to concentrate on the fossil and Maria as the examples rather than go through all the individual vessels, as it will get repetitive, because we used exactly the same methods for each individual vessel that we looked at. Right. So the first of our vessels that we looked at, websites that we looked at, was the Crew List Index Project, or CLIP, which is a free-to-access website that is specifically designed to help assist research into British merchant seafarers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And if you haven't accessed this, really use it. It is a really good website. You can search vessels by their name, their official number, port of registry, and even the master of the vessel and its owner. So really powerful way of searching for information. And what the site will actually give you is the mercantile navy list entries for each vessel by year, entries into appropriations books, so when it's been registered at a port. And it will also, if you're lucky, give you log transcripts. If it doesn't give you the log transcript, it will tell you where the original logs are. So which maritime or archive, regional archive they're in. So our first vessel we looked at was the Fossil. It's an uncommon spelling name, and it's an uncommon spelling. It's an uncommon vessel. There were absolutely no vessels of this name registered in the Mercantile Navy list. So, undeterred, we decided to change the spelling of this. So we altered the search parameters a little bit to the more conventional spelling of double S and came up with two vessels. The first being the fossil of Ipswich, and the second being the fossil of Pwllheli and later Llanbedrog. We thought we might actually be onto something here. It was the right vessel of the right period in the right area. However, we could not find any reference to it going ashore at Abersoch. So this remained a mystery to us as to how it had come to be there. The Maria, though, presented a slightly different problem. Well, when I say slight, it was a completely opposite problem, in that there are, for this period in question, 209 vessels named Maria operating through the British registries, many of which were operating around the Welsh coast. So how do we pick out this vessel or these vessels, given that there are two possible dates from from this list of 209? One possible way we could do this would be to access the Lloyd's Register Foundation and see if the vessel is listed one year and not the other. Now, again, the Lloyd's Register Foundation website is a fantastic resource that is free to access, and it isn't just about the Lloyd's Register. It also contains information about the wreck returns and fleet statistics. But similar to CLIP, there are multiple vessels of the same name. So you've got to pick out which one or ones it's likely to be. Add to that, not all vessels will appear in the Lloyd's Register. Not all vessels are registered with Lloyd's, and for British registered vessels, and foreign registered vessels may not appear at all, as they will be entered into other registries. Also, as a consideration, that currently not all editions of Lloyd's Register are available online. So some questions remain. During the course of our research, we also came across some vessels, as I say, that weren't British registered, how do we find out physical characteristics of those vessels? We did do some searching around and typed in specific words into Google and came back with for Canadian vessels. And it turns out that there is a repository hosted by the Library and Archives of Canada for vessels that are registered in Canada from the 18th century onwards. And that was we found that really searchable, easy to use repository that is again free to access. Norwegian registered vessels that we researched, I already knew of a website hosted by the Norwegian Maritime Museum that I had discovered whilst I was completing my part 2 work way back in the early 2010s. This is the culturenav.org website, which whilst it's free to use and contains a wealth of information, it is not as easy to use as some of the others, but well worth the effort if you are looking at Norwegian vessels. Our other country that we ended up researching for vessels for was the United States of America. And whilst I was participating in the Lloyd Register Foundation course that the NAS ran over the summer, which was really, really useful for me, I have to say, one of the participants pointed out that the American Lloyds had a website that was free to use, and it was hosted by the Mystic Seaport Museum. So I have that gentleman whose name I can't remember to thank for that. But it's still not helping us identify which specific vessels the Maria is or other vessels of similar names. So how did we pull out which vessels are the Maria? So we went back to our source data and the newspaper articles that had cited them for our original list and looked at them slightly more closely. And here you can see extracts from the newspapers that we used. The first of these, sorry, it's probably important to point out that these have both been used with permission of the British Newspaper Archives. So thank you to those for letting me use these today. So the first of these is the Lloyd's List entry for St Tudwall's Road, which is the area of sea around Abersoch, for July the 29th, 1872. And yeah, it mentions the Maria. Importantly, she is the Maria of Portmadoc. And she is in the bay with 3 other light schooners, which suggests that she is a schooner herself. It's also important to point out here that they're using the term put in, which would suggest that she is at anchor, having arrived from her destination at the port. She's not ashore or in any sort of trouble, according to this. The explanation for her being present in our list comes from the paragraph below, where you can see that the hull of the brig Siren has gone ashore the previous month in St Tudwall's Sound, which is off to the west of Abersoch, and the wreck is being scattered along the beach from Hellsmouth to Abersoch itself. We felt at this point it was important, or possible at least, to rule this vessel out of our list of suspects and move on to our next candidate for Maria. The Maria, this is cited in the report extract below. The date for this was late November 1872, and again it shows the wreck of the Maria. And it's a report, this being written by her master, John Enos. It tells us that she's a schooner, she's around 83 tons, and she's from Aberystwyth. It also tells us how much slate, what her cargo was, which is 128 tons of slate. It goes on to describe how she came to be ashore as well. So that is useful information as we're working our way through the project. This information we were then able to take back to both the CLIP registry and to the Lloyd's Register. And here, indeed, you can see that the Maria is listed in Lloyd's for 1872. This gives us a massive amount of information about her size, her owner, when she was built, and what she does. It also gives us information about her being held together with iron bolts, and her official number. What it doesn't tell us, usefully, is her length. In any of the Lloyd's registers or mercantile navy lists, there was never any mention made of her length, which is problematic for us, given that all we basically know about our two wet wrecks on Abersoch Beach is that they are between 18.5 metres or 12 metres in length. What was even more problematic to us and needed to be explained was why she then featured in the 1873 Lloyd's Register. We could find no further references to her in the newspapers searching under Maria and Abersoch and the date. However, we now knew that she came from Aberystwyth, so we altered the search criteria to include Aberystwyth rather than Abersoch, and we came back with much more information. So we knew that in 1872, the newspapers reported that she'd gone ashore at Abersoch after parting her port cable in a gale. She quickly filled with water, and the Lloyd's insurance agent had assessed her as being in a bad condition, with her deck damaged and her cabin gone. However, her look seems to have changed by December 1872. The newspapers go on to explain that the cargo she had been carrying had been removed, and she had been able to be refloated and moved round to Abersoch Harbour, where she was to be auctioned off. It would seem then that Lloyd's were trying to recoup some of the payout costs that they had lost in her insurance claim. The evidence based on both the Mercantile Navy List and the Lloyd's Register would suggest that she was bought back by John Enos, who then would have paid for the repairs with the insurance money. And you can see the small print on the Lloyd's entry for 1873 that the repairs have indeed been done to her deck and cabin in the previous 6 months. From then on, it was possible to continue to watch her trade around the coast of Wales and England all the way through to 1879. This is a testament to how effective the newspapers of the period were at reporting mercantile shipping news. We were able to then follow them through to her story comes to the end in July 1879, where she's reported as having sailed from Runcorn round the west coast of Scotland on her way to Newcastle. Unfortunately, it appears that she has sunk off the island of Tiree. However, there was no explanation given in the newspapers as to why this had occurred. The crew was picked up by another schooner, fortunately. But based on this information, again, we felt it was suitable or applicable to remove the Maria from our investigation. The same routine was used for each vessel that we investigated. Where we were only able to find limited amounts of data using the search terms of Abersoch and ashore and the vessel's name, we then turned that information around based on what we knew, and were able to trace most of them back through the newspapers and archives using that information. Eventually, we were able to whittle the list down from 31 vessels to 3 vessels, which we thought was quite good going. We also believe that we will be able to narrow the search still further, both once we're able to gain access to the physical archives once they become available to us again, and also by archaeological investigation, as we think that there will be specific characteristics within the archaeological evidence that will be able for us to pinpoint a specific vessel or rule that vessel out. However, I must also stress at this point that it's important to note that it may never be possible for us to positively identify one or either of the vessels. due to the fact that they may have come to be on Abersoch Beach for a reason other than wreck. For instance, my project for my Part 2 NAS certificate was for a vessel called the Thora, which was wrecked at Pwllheli in the early 20th century, but was then bought and moved to Holyhead, where she now lies at the back of Holyhead Harbour. So, going on to our conclusions, my original premise was how effective is using online data to conduct historic maritime research for specific vessels, and I'd have to argue that it was highly effective. From a list of 31 vessels down to 3 without accessing physical archives is, I think, quite an achievement. However, what the online archives do not do is create a complete picture. We will still need to visit physical archives to complete our data. But what it does allow us as researchers to do is to plan more focused visits. So if you're like me and have a long way to travel to get to these archives, you will only be able to spend a limited amount of time. Therefore, being able to get there and come away with a small amount of information is much more beneficial, and so you'll be able to come away with the full picture rather than parts of a jigsaw. That is the end of my presentation.